As some disclaimers, I'm not a college professor. I have no children. I'm going to speak to you with some authority. You can add your own grains of salt. One thing, though, so my family tree goes about 14 generations back. The median age of fatherhood is 36, so I have some time. It might have led to some defects, but we'll see. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through 3 sections, basically objectives, concepts, goals, and strategies. I'm just going to power through them, and then hopefully we have time for questions and answers. In terms of objectives, what is it that we want? You'll notice "we" has an asterisk. The genes for spaceflight, Malcolm and Simone's, interstellar ships, those aren't evenly distributed. If you spend a lot of time trying to raise everyone's fertility, some people are not you. It's a little weird to worry about other groups' fertility. Concepts, things that I think, maybe it's important to be familiar with to sort of frame the pursuit of those objectives. And then, the goals that you should have, the strategies that you should pursue. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so as an objective, we might say, what do we want? We want more and better people. We want human flourishing. What is it that you would want to get if you want to have this? Maybe you want to have a higher TFR. Maybe you want to have wealthier people, smarter people. What are the things that you might want to look at and try to improve in order to have this human flourishing? If you know what those are and you can kind of work backwards from them, then you probably stand a chance. Next slide. So, one is like, maybe we want a different age structure. The age structure of much of the developed world actually looks kind of like that, on now, I guess, also my left. And it really should look like the other one. The age dependency ratios are all screwed up. Social Security's going to be insolvent in 2030. The kinds of people that join the military in the United States don't actually resemble the decision makers anymore. These are all huge problems. Next slide. Maybe we want a different relationship between income and TFR. This is a sketch taken from the 2016, done freehand, of the 2016 American Community Survey data on household income and TFR. I make no pronouncements as to the buckets, but basically in the lower income buckets, you have higher than replacement rate fertility. In the highest income buckets, you make higher than replacement rate fertility. And then in the middle, it's like, Series 2 BMWs, another dog. They're spending on basically everything besides having children. And, maybe you would want the regime to look more like the one in green or the one in red. I think the one in blue is probably better. Next slide. Maybe you just want a better median marriage age. So again, this is from the US Census, done freehand. But it used to be that the median age of marriage for women was between about 20 and 25. As late as 1980, the median age for marriage was 22. 1980 is 1 year after the first Star Trek movie came out. Maybe you want to have less debauchery. This is the most inflammatory slide, so I included the source. You can Google it and see if it's true. The relationships between men and women, they're not so good now. And maybe that's because, make of that what you will. But maybe we would want things to be more like in the future, that projection there. Can you go to the next slide? And maybe you want to go Institute for Family Studies, just more marriage at all costs. It turns out the great decline in divorces that we've seen in the last few decades is because of cratering in the marriage rate, and actually divorces kind of track with the marriage rate. So if you want to have more marriages, maybe don't worry so much about the family courts. I don't know about that. Next slide. Here's kind of my own wish list. These are things that I think if you design your society around and you just like measure the outcomes, these are good goals to have. We can talk about them more, but this is what I would want. And cynically, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. But I saw some post on Twitter this morning that I thought was very important. If you go to the next slide, you'll see it too. This is from More Births on Twitter. He's actually here. I'm not going to out him, but there have been actually micro baby booms in very different countries, including the United States. And they have this kind of mix of structural and cultural causes. whether it's that they have a very proud and confident culture. We tear down statues of our founding fathers and great statesmen. Mongolia builds massive statues of Genghis Khan. It's a very different attitude towards their national propagation. Seatbelt laws, car seat laws, whether or not you have affordably priced minivans, these actually have huge effects on fertility. If you can go to the next slide. Let's look at those structural and cultural factors. Let's talk a little bit about path dependency, and then let's talk about measuring results and setting goals. Next slide. Okay, so you might say, independent of marriage, that we could have fertility. There's a delinking of sex and reproduction. There's a delinking of sex and marriage. But it turns out, and this is from Lyman Stonsky, the fertility rate of married people is actually pretty good. What's true, though, about today is that basically no one is married. So the reason for Western fertility decline is actually the marriage. In fact, half or more of fertility shifts are explained by the marriage rate. But for people who are married, whose spouses are present, they just keep having kids. This will be no surprise to the many parents in this room. If you like your spouse a lot, sometimes you do more than hug them. And if you don't have a spouse, it's kind of hard to make kids. And by structural factors, I mean stuff more like this. So this is the car seat study. It's just an absurd effect size in terms of the number of births that don't happen because of the burdens of okay, if you have 3 kids in the car and they're all of a certain age, it's now you got to buy a lot of car seats. You have to have a big enough car. There are a lot of expenses involved in that. Parents just stop having kids. And actually, the car seats are not even that effective. You're not saving any kids' lives. Other structural factors. This is an amazing paper that you should read. It's available for free. Family Systems and Fertility Intentions: Exploring Pathways of Influence. Every single OECD country has a fertility gap in terms of intention versus fulfillment. Women want to have kids. They seem to like babies. They don't have them. Why is that? Well, it turns out if you have people living on top of each other in buildings, they feel kind of oppressed and they don't reproduce. And then if you spread them too far out, suddenly there are no grandparents for babysitting, and then they also don't have kids. And you need to have the right spatial mix of parents and support systems for people to have kids. If you go to the next slide. Here's something that's kind of both a structural and cultural factor combined. This is from the Office of National Statistics in the UK. There's been a massive increase it's actually the biggest category of all, in the number of births that are to women who are 40 and up. And this is technological, but it's also cultural, because actually most of those women are having their children out of wedlock. And this is concurrent with basically the cratering of pregnancies that occur among younger women, so women younger than 20, sometimes younger than 18. And you can say what you want about teenage pregnancy, but it turns out if you eliminate teenage pregnancy from your society, you basically turn off the fertility of women between the ages of 20 and 35. There's something about trying to guard against teenage pregnancy at all costs that makes people delay having kids throughout their most fertile and productive years, when probably they should be having kids. If you can go to the next slide. Okay, this is, I apologize in advance. There have been some other nerdy people that talk here. Imagine I have 2 blocks of metal, and I use heat and pressure, and I send them through, different pressure and volume regimes. I'm compressing these blocks, I'm heating them up, I'm doing whatever to them. How much work have I done to these 2 blocks, at different periods in time? You can end up, and this happens all the time in manufacturing, you can end up with the same block of metal, allegedly, but it turns out you're doing 2 different amounts of work to them. It has huge implications for stress fractures and stuff like that. Life is also like this. If you have 2 sets of people and they're all married at the age of 49, that doesn't tell you that much, because some of them would have gotten married at 20 and some of them would have gotten married at 40. And having kids at 20 is probably a lot easier. It is a lot easier than having kids at 40. If you go to the next slide. The other side of path dependency is more like this. Is to make these choices, to go through life in a certain way, what kind of has to be given to young people, what kind of has to be conveyed to them is that every decision they make at every point in time is going to have closure to other paths that they could take. Think of it this way. In the United States, female doctors have an infertility rate that's, I think, 4 times greater than other women, and also they retire like basically around the age of 40. It's like, what was the point of that? Like, why did they go to medical school? They lose both a medical career and their fertility. It's crazy, but like no one tells them that. If you can go to the next slide. And then in terms of results and goals, this is, we'll go through a lot of this stuff in day 2, but it's like, I think for whatever that asterisk of we is, maybe you're like, hey, I want to increase Calvinist birth rates, or maybe some other populations. You want to increase their birth rates. You have to basically take responsibility for that. You have to set goals for that. If you go to the next slide, you need to give the children of that community different life paths. You have to build services that defray their costs. You have to establish communities for them. If you go to the next slide. It might be a little bit weird, but like maybe you could have reporting built around this. For the circle of people in your concern, what's the TFR? How many marriages are there? How many children are born each year? What's the cost of having a kid? My wish list has a lot of those things in there. And then you should check up on them. You should check up on them year after year. You should see whether those numbers are increasing or decreasing, and then modify the life paths of people in them. It's very hard to get 26-year-olds to do something. But it's a lot easier to kind of like raise 10-year-olds well. I think I say this as a non-parent. If you have feedbacks and questions, you can send this to me here. But that's what I wanted to give to you today.